For Krima Media's Polity, I'm Tabi Madiba. Joining me today is former City Press editor Len Kalane, here to discuss his book titled The Chapter We Wrote, The City Press Story. Welcome, Len.
Hi, thank you.
Why did you see it befitting to honor the late author and legendary editor Percy Qoboza with this book?
Yeah, there are actually 3 dimensions, maybe even 4 dimensions to the book. I guess the first one is the relaunch of City Press itself, which was a very interesting development. I mean, I think we should start there before we get into the Percy Qobozas of this world. That happened way back in 1982. There were very few black voices actually in terms of publications, and one of those was the Sowetan. And the Sowetan had been created in 1981, and City Press came in 1982. But then let me give you a little bit of history. When City Press came around was in 1982, it was actually a relaunch. It had been there from 1955 when it was first established as Golden City Post. And then it closed down some time around 1972, I would imagine. And then it was relaunched by Jim Bailey in 1982. That in itself was a very interesting development because the Sowetan was, in my opinion, a little bit muted. And that could have been the result of the fact that its predecessor publication before it had been banned, The World and Post. So I think they were a little bit cautious in terms of being very loud as it were. So City Press came Golden City Press. It was the first, the initial title, much more breezier and a very cheeky tabloid and all of it. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension, it's the coming to City Press of Percy Qoboza himself as the editor, you know, giving Percy's track record in journalism and the fact that he was a big name, and you would know that prior to that he was the editor of The World and Post, which were banned before the Sowetan. So he came with a whole lot of expectations to add to the significance of City Press as a publication itself. But the other thing, to answer your question now, a lot is known about Percy and a lot has been said. But there's not much that has been written about him, actually, which is quite surprising. And I thought I would use the City Press story as an opportunity to bring Percy Qoboza's name back to life, and because it's a long time ago. He died in 1988. You know, just to tell the millennials that we had this type of a person in our midst. As a legendary editor.
And just speak to us a bit more about Qoboza's character and your relationship to him.
Well, I mean, he was 20 years older than me, number one. He was a very colorful character, exuberant and daring, but he was adventurous as well. Qoboza became the editor of The World in 1974. He brought respectability to the publication. He said, or to black journalism for that matter, and he said that we need to be addressing the issues of the day and talk about us, our aspirations, our sufferings, all that. And that's really what made Percy. He had hardly warmed the editor's chair after he had been appointed, and then he got the Nieman Fellow. He went abroad for a year to do his Nieman Fellow. Then he came back in time for June 17, 1976. The World became a very trusted and reliable information platform in terms of what was unfolding in the townships, because white journalists could not get into the township, and therefore the white media at the time, which was quite dominant, wasn't able to really report adequately on the June 16. So history actually made Percy and circumstances, and he was brave. He was brave to step up and said that I am changing the course of journalism and I'm going to be part of the course of history as it unfolds in South Africa. So that actually made him quite legendary. Then because of that, some of his journalists got arrested, because that was the norm at the time. That was the atmosphere. It was detention without trial. And Percy started embarking on what we call campaign journalism. He started the first Free Mandela campaign. And because of his campaign style of journalism, he was really a thorn in the eyes of the then apartheid authorities. And when there was the October 17 clampdown, the Black Wednesday, he was actually arrested as well and put in detention for about 6 months. And that's the day when the world was actually banned. And then he came back to edit another title that was actually the world, except for the name. And it was called Post, because it had the same stuff, it had the same offices, same everything. And he edited the Post as well. And that too got banned. The Sweaten replaced that. But Percy was no longer the editor. He had quit, you know. He went back to the States to become the resident editor of the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken. And he came back home and he joined a group called Group Editors, which was some formidable editors who came together, black and white, you know, to run a PR and I think a news service platform called Group Editors. And that didn't take hold for too long. And then he was back home for some time, just sitting there. And that's when we approached him at City Press to come and be the editor.
And can you briefly talk to us about the big day, Nelson Mandela's release from jail in 1990, and the City Press coverage of his release, as you mentioned that it was the highlight of your career?
Yep. Well, of any journalist. Here is this Mandela chap who we had no idea what he looked like. And I was the news editor at the time. It was quite unfortunate because we were a Sunday newspaper and it was getting out on a Sunday. And we were disadvantaged and we had to think on our feet. And you know, given the experience that some of us had as having spent many years behind the desk and as journalists, we came out with a plan that actually involved us camping out in all of the strategic points that we thought Mandela would emerge from, you know, after his release, because we couldn't trust the authorities then because they gave us the date of a Sunday, and we thought that was too risky for them to announce ahead of time that Mandela would be released on such and such a day, because you know there would be security risks involved, we thought, you know. And then we assembled a Mandela special team for the whole week that had to be everywhere possible, at the house in Orlando West, in Qunu, you know, anywhere in Cape Town, you know, all the top hotels, wherever, and we had a team. So we put all of our resources there. But you know, that doesn't mean that, you know, you would then have been able to fill up your paper on the Sunday. And what we did, we dug out for information about him from people that knew him before he went to jail. The memories about him, you know, we went to the Rivonia trial records to get the Rivonia trial speech. Try and recapture the atmosphere of what happened before he was arrested and what might possibly happen on his release. You know, we were there. We covered a whole lot of that, and so that really constituted the bulk of the package on Sunday. We then had to write a story, which would, in journalism, we would say it's a preview ahead of his release. Luckily for us, the South African government released a prison issue picture of him. So that saved the day for us, because then we could, you know, run that picture and say, here he is, By Saturday evening after deadline, it was all over for us. So we had to pack and because, there was no point. But then we were still as relevant the next day when he came out. I think it was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, thankfully, because even for all the other newspapers in the morning of Sunday, none of us would have been able to scoop any other except for, great thinking, and great planning and strategic execution. That's what saved the day. So it was a very challenging kind of thing, and to me that was the highlight of my career as a news editor.
And can you briefly talk to us about the press conference that you risked having with the ANC, as you weren't allowed to quote or give ANC the major focus in your stories?
Well, I wasn't there actually in that press conference. It was ZB Molefe, one of the prolific City Press writers. He was actually the first deputy editor of City Press. But, the story is in the book, and then he describes what happened and how marvelous it was, and then how they would listen to Oliver Tambo saying the things that he said. What is interesting at the time is that everything that we knew or that came from the ANC or any other representative of the ANC, we could not publish because it was a banned organization. Well, all of them, including the PAC as well. We had a way around that. We would say, according to sources or according to reliable sources. When we had been speaking directly to Tom Sibina was the spokesman of the ANC. You got the word from Tom Sibina, and he represented the ANC. Not even Thabo Mbeki, not even Oliver Tambo. It would always be Tom Sibina because he was based in Lusaka. And we had a hotline to Tom Sibina, both telephonically, which the lines were bad then, but then there was the reliable telex machine. We would go to this telex and say, it was a slow process. Is that the ANC? Then you wait for a good 10 minutes, and then it rattles back to you and say, yes, this is the ANC. And you go back, is that Tom Sibina? You type out. At the time, it was, the telex machine itself was a wonder. But then, sitting here today and you say, oh my God, that's where we come from.
And can you briefly tell us how you felt when you first learned that City Press, Drum and True Love were sold to National Pers, which later became to be known as Naspers and now Media 24?
Yes. Now listen, I was there, fortunately or unfortunately, because I was kind of very close to Percy. City Press wasn't doing well, when he relaunched it. And then Jim Bailey, the founder, was probably running into some financial problems, I assume, right? And then he wanted to sell City Press. He went to the Argus Group. The Argus Group is what we call the independent media today, the owners of the Star. And incidentally, they were also the owners of the Sowetan, before the Sowetan was given to Dr. Motlana. And they said no. And then, when City Press was launched, it was launched on a 50-50 venture with what we call the South African Associated Newspapers, which were the owners of the Sunday Times, the Sunday Express, then you won't know about the Sunday Express, and the Rand Daily Mail. So those were the three main publications at the time, quite liberal in outlook. So in other words, they were anti-government, so it was thought. That's why the Rand Daily Mail was actually closed down, and it was replaced by Business Day. It was on a Wednesday when we first got wind of this. So we left with Percy, the two of us, to go to this meeting at a Landrost hotel in Plain Street, Johannesburg. Now I describe in the book about this Landrost hotel and how it's been swallowed up by the decaying Johannesburg CBD, right? You won't even recognize that it used to be wow, in its heyday. That was way back in 1982. So we went to this thing, But then I remained at the lobby when Percy went up there to go and meet the Naspers masters at that time. It was a guy called Lang David de Villiers, a quite liberal Afrikaner net at the time. And I think some other people, I think Pete Cilliers was there. I'm not too sure if Ton Vosloo was there, but then Ton Vosloo would emerge as one of the significant players later on, you know, within the whole Naspers game. Then Percy came down, and I was sitting there, and, you know, then we were leaving back to the office, and he said, we've been sold to Naspers, Nationale Pers. Right? What? You know, but we knew Nationale Pers was part of the apartheid government. But then this comes on the backdrop of the information scandal. And we weren't really at ease about that. And then, but then we would take our cue from people like Percy Gobos. But he didn't seem so alarmed, actually. And that was my reading of him at the time. And then he appeared to be very fond of this Lang David de Villiers. Then when the staff was told about this, we then look up at them to say, what do we do now? And then it wasn't only him. There was another influential editor called Stan Mochwadi. And then when they indicated that they were staying, we just said, what do we stay? You know, we were young, some of us. I was a news editor at a very young age, right? Then there were conditions put down. They said, no interference. We were stridently anti-apartheid as a newspaper. Now, we made very strange bedfellows with Naspers because they were known to be actually the mouthpiece or even the machinery of the whole apartheid, or they were even part of it, actually. An editorial charter was put into place to say that there will be non-interference. And you know, that pledge and signatures were attached. So that protected us in a way. But what then happened after that? Then we put it to the test. We actually abused the relationship because we pushed the envelope even further. And so City Press became even much more vocal, you know, as an anti-apartheid publication than it had been before, because we were scared that we would be banned. Then we were comfortable with this new relationship because we said, they can't ban us now. You see, we part of one of their wisdom. So it was fun, actually. And then, you know, then City Press became City Press, as you would know it. And we forgot about the fact that we belong to National Pers, which become Naspers, which is today even Media 24. And then very few people would actually remember that. And probably that's the reason I started writing the book. I started writing the book because I was there. I know the facts. I know the story, and I was beginning to pick up the fact that people were misrepresenting City Press history, and I had an obligation as one of the few that are remaining, who probably are still young by comparison to the others. Most of them are dead now, and those others are older, you know. So yeah, I still had some energy.
And lastly, how could you say journalism and journalists have changed since you left the industry?
Oh, that's the inevitable question. I always get to be asked that. It is not a fair comparison, actually. You can't even start saying we were better, you know, they are not, because the environment has changed dramatically. It's a different ball game, and I can give you some examples. We were operated in the apartheid era, so we were activists. The environment was conducive for us to thrive in what we call campaign journalism or advocacy journalism. We were angry, we were bitter, but we also had the end game. We knew where we're going, and we knew what the likely outcome would be. But then we were not so well educated as well. Very few of us had degrees or had gone beyond matric. That's how good maybe bantu education was even at the time. You meet with today's matriculant, you can compare to our times non-matriculants, you know, in terms of intellectual outlook and everything. Well, it's the education system, I believe, and it's the environment. That's why the environments are not the same. So the comparisons are, I find it very difficult to even want to start with that kind of discussion. Then you had the post-Mandela era, you know, where and there was more freedom relatively in terms of what you can do in the media. And there was a romantic relationship for a very, very long time with the government of the day and the media. You know, you couldn't even start to want to criticize Mandela or the new ANC administration. Now, I thought they were in a fix, actually. You know, I was out by then, and I said, oh, this new generation are in a fix. I don't know how they're going to handle this. They're either going to have to be lapdogs, which you don't want to be seen to be as a journalist. And then that period unfolded, and then it went right up to the Mbeki years. You know, you can see the difference already about, you know, between that period that you're asking me about and the new period that came with the Mandela administration. Then, okay, then you had the Zuma administration. But then when the Zuma administration, with all its faults, would, you know, then I think that's when the journalists would turn around and do the type of things that we did then against the apartheid government, because, you know, the Zuma administration provided a lot of material in the same way as I said about the apartheid government then. But then technology was also seeping into journalism and how we were beginning to deal with news. In my time, it was the press, it wasn't media. With the media came various mediums, platforms all over. Then you come into the third phase. You would realize that I'm painting faces for you. So this is the third phase. And not only is television in trouble, you understand that that the press has been strangled. You know, you need to actually recenter it and repurpose it, because television came and it made the press a little bit relevant, but television couldn't get into detail, so the press still had a chance, you know. But you have social media where every Tom, Dick and Harry is a journalist now. And, you know, they can just get the news out quicker than you can. So we are sitting here, there's an evolution that is rapidly taking place all the time in such a way that comparisons would actually be unfair. So that would be my answer.
That was former City Press editor Len Kalane speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about his book titled The Chapter We Wrote, The City Press Story.